This is the day that we have all been waiting for, the day where Ruth and Boaz finally come together as husband and wife. So we had to set up a little celebration here because the narrator of the story doesn't give us much detail about this day at all. But here's the good news. We are not just celebrating a wedding. We are celebrating God's redemption. Not just of Ruth, but also of Naomi. This goes all the way back to Ruth 2:12, where Boaz prays over Ruth and says that because she has come to find refuge under the wings of the God of Israel, God is going to bless and reward her. So today, yes, we get to celebrate a wedding, but even more so, we get to celebrate God's redemption. Welcome back, you guys. I am so glad you came back, but here's the reality. You had to come back because you had to find out what was going to happen, right? We can't be on the edge of our seats. We can't leave Ruth and Naomi sitting in Naomi's house just waiting forever. I mean, right? That's the thing about waiting. We don't have to wait forever. Sometimes we have to wait on the Lord for a good long time and it feels like forever, but he doesn't leave us waiting forever. Now, there was something where we left off last week where, at the very end of chapter 3, where she says, wait, for the matter will be settled today. I could live with that kind of waiting. Do you know what I mean? Like, I could live with that kind of waiting. If everything was going to be settled today, perfect. I mean, that's just a couple Netflix shows in one season of something. We get that thing resolved. But here's the deal. You had to come back. Now, because you are the best Bible study students out there, you already know what's happened because you did your homework, didn't you? Right? Did everybody do it? Okay, that's good. That's good. Now listen, and if you didn't get to it, here's the deal. This is the beauty. You just go back. Okay, don't skip it. Don't be like, oh, I heard the message. Oh, no. Because God is going to teach you things in your own personal time when you've got the word and you've got your coffee and it's just you and him that I will never get to. There are things that you will see that I will never see. So if you end up really liking going through this message, but you didn't get to your homework, go back and get to it because that's where really the good stuff is going to be. But if you did your homework, you know what happens. And I just want us to jump in there because today is a very, very exciting day where men are going to take their sandals off and hand them to one another. So you are not going to want to miss this. All right, let's read the first 4 verses of chapter 4. Boaz went to the gate of the town and sat down there. Soon the family redeemer Boaz had spoken about came by. Boaz said, "Come over here and sit down." So he went over and sat down. Then Boaz took 10 men of the town's elders and said, "Sit here." And they sat down. He said to the Redeemer, "Naomi, who has returned from the territory of Moab, is selling the portion of the field that belonged to our brother Elimelech. I thought I should inform you. Buy it back in the presence of those seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you want to redeem it, do it. But if you do not want to redeem it, tell me so that I will know, because there isn't anyone other than you to redeem it, and I am next after you." "I want to redeem it," he answered. And we'll stop there. So at that moment, I have to say I'm just very glad that the story doesn't end at the end of verse 4, right? Because the nameless kinsman redeemer says, yeah, absolutely, I am totally in. And every person in the room lets out a sigh of disappointment, right? No, we don't like the nameless kinsman redeemer. We don't know anything about him. He might be the greatest guy in the world, but we want Boaz. We love Boaz. We are committed to Boaz and Ruth working out, and we don't want him to get Ruth. Now, it's interesting, in this text, some of your Bibles might even have at the bottom that Boaz calls the guy so-and-so. He literally is like, hey, so-and-so, you come over here and sit down. He is truly like a nameless kinsman redeemer. We don't hear anything else about this guy after this, and Boaz doesn't even do him the dignity of giving him a name. It's just this nameless kind of kinsman redeemer that is the next one in line. I also want you to note that Boaz says to him, you redeem her, but if you can't do it, I will, because there's nobody else. That's pretty interesting when we think of all that is hanging in the balance for Naomi's entire life. Again, we can't say it enough. This is not just about Naomi losing her husband and losing her 2 sons. That in and of itself would be an unbearable heap of tragedy. But also because of the patriarchal society, there's nothing, she has no way to carry on her family's name, no rights to her own land. And remember, those were the 2 things that were so important to an Israelite woman. This was everything for her well-being. And so to think that there were only 2 relatives out there that could have done this for the family, we're so glad at least one of them worked out, right? And we're glad that the second one especially works out. Now, why does this so-and-so redeemer say right away that he will redeem the land? He goes, great, sounds great to me. Why? Because he knows that it's just Naomi. It's all of this land that he's going to get, and it's just Naomi. And Naomi, he knows, is not going to get married, meaning she is not going to have children, meaning his children, his legacy, can take over this land. So this is just more property for his family, for his legacy. There is absolutely nothing but just profit here. This is just a no-risk proposition, and he is in. But then, aren't we glad that this continues? And I love this. Here, Boaz, verse 5. Then Boaz said, this is the fine print, by the way. This is like down there at the medication commercials where it's like, hey, you're going to feel great, but then all of a sudden there's 35 things that could happen to you if you take this medication. Then Boaz said, on the day you buy the field from Naomi, you will acquire Ruth, the Moabitess, the wife of the deceased man, to perpetuate the man's name on his property. The Redeemer replied, oh, I can't redeem it myself, or I will ruin my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption, because I can't redeem it. Okay, what is Boaz doing here? Well, first of all, Boaz is being clever. He is being clever. He gets the man to agree to it, but then once he agrees to it, he kind of adds some things. Oh, okay, great, you've agreed? Well, great, then you're not going to mind also taking Ruth the Moabitess. You notice he throws that part in. Now, maybe he's throwing that part in so the deal looks unattractive. Maybe he is throwing that part in just for legal thing. You know, he's got the 10 elders that are sitting there. They are witnesses to what is going on here. So he might just be clear about what part of this is. But so Ruth the Moabitess, and then he says the deceased man's widow, something to that effect, depending on what translation you have. And then he says, in order to perpetuate the family name. So now all of a sudden, this is no longer about the kinsman redeemer so-and-so's family name. Now this is probably what Boaz is talking about is Elimelech here, Elimelech's family name. Suddenly, this has completely changed, right? Now all of a sudden, this is not a low-risk proposition. Now he is going to have to take Ruth as his wife, because in order to fulfill all of this for Elimelech's family name to continue, Ruth would have to get pregnant and have a son. So then we're talking about more mouths to feed, and it's not even for his own estate. It will be for someone else's. And now all of a sudden he says, wait, this is not something that I want to do. Now what I love about Boaz here is that we start to see that Boaz has a personality. Okay, he's a good guy. He's an upstanding guy. But isn't it good that he can be just a little shrewd if he has to be, a little bit clever, that he's got a little bit of this like darker side to him? I I couldn't help but think of the show or the series from years ago, Anne of Green Gables. Okay, I just dated myself massively. But I don't care if you're 18 years old and you're watching this. You need to go back and find Anne of Green Gables, and you need to set aside, a good 6 hours and just sit there with your popcorn and just love it, because it is great writing, it is great acting, and it is a wonderful love story. But there is this one part where Anne and Gil, they're like the Ruth and Boaz. You're waiting the whole time for them to get together. I won't give it away, but you're waiting the whole time for them to get together. And one day Anne is walking through the fields with her adopted mother, Marilla. And Marilla is pushing Anne toward Gil, and Anne just goes, "But he's just too good, Marilla. He's just so good." And as they're walking, Marilla goes, "Well, would you want somebody wicked?" And I love what she goes. Anne says, "I wouldn't want to marry anybody who was wicked, but I think I'd like it if he could be wicked and wouldn't." Like it if he could be wicked and wouldn't. And I'm like, yes, that's the guy. That's the guy I'm looking for too. We have to know. We have to know that they could be, that it's in them, right? Otherwise, people are just too squeaky clean. And so here, Boaz, it's like maybe he could be, but he's not. But he's clever, and he's shrewd, and he's doing what he needs to do here. And I just absolutely love it. And so now, all of a sudden, Mr. So-and-so says, "I cannot do it. It would ruin my own estate." Now, you will remember from your homework that in order to be a kinsman redeemer, there are really 3 things that we can spot. Maybe there are more, but 3 important things we can spot about what it means to be a kinsman redeemer. And the first is that you have to be near of kin, right? You have to be a relative. You can't, I might like you, but if I'm not a relative, I can't do for you what needs to be done. So you have to be near of kin. You also have to be able. So you have to be in a good standing where you could actually purchase the property and where you could take care of the people that you're going to be taking care of. So you have to be near of kin, you have to be able, but you also, and I think this is so important, you had to be willing. You did not have to redeem. It was not incumbent upon you. It was what the law put forth, but you had to still choose it. And here this Mr. So-and-so says, "Yeah, I'm out. Too risky, endangers my own estate. I cannot do it." It's interesting because we actually never hear from this nameless kinsman redeemer again. He just kind of falls away. And isn't it interesting that the very thing that he wanted to do was keep on his own legacy, and his legacy kind of disappears. Years ago, when I was first exposed to the book of Ruth, it was at my parents' church back in Virginia, and I was young, and there was a Bible teacher by the name of Major Ian Thomas that had come. He has since passed away. But he taught on this passage, and it was his opinion that Mr. So-and-so kinsman redeemer represented the law, and that Boaz represented Christ. That what the law could not ultimately do, whether or not he didn't want to or he just couldn't do it, but where he fell short, Boaz comes in and does. Where the law falls short, Christ comes and does. Food for thought. I don't know if that's true or not, but whenever I read it, I think, I like that. I like that. So he was unwilling in the end, and he does what is normal and what is expected. Just like Orpah did what was normal and expected. She goes back to Moab. Nobody really faults her for that. Nobody really faults this nameless kinsman redeemer for just taking the normal route. But here's one for us today, and I hope this will sink into your souls. God doesn't ask us to do extraordinary things. He asks us to show extraordinary hesed. He's not asking Boaz here or Ruth earlier to do extraordinary things. He's just asking them to show extraordinary hesed. And what is that hesed again? It's that covenant loyalty. It's that love and faithfulness and goodness. It's It's the unusual kind of love. It's the unusual kind of sacrifice. It's going the extra mile. For us as New Testament believers, it is Christ-likeness that is so different, that just surprises people. That is what God is calling us to. And I think especially in the day of social media, where everybody's posting these amazing things that they're doing, or extraordinary things that they're doing, or we have so many followers for Jesus, or whatever it is. God's not asking us for that kind of thing. He's asking us to extraordinarily love people. And that is all that sets Ruth and Boaz apart in this story. And I love it so much because none of them have some special heavenly ticket. They're just doing what God has called them to do. And as I look out and I see your faces, and as I look at this room and I see the faces here, we can change the world through Hesed, through that covenant loyalty. But I will tell you, we cannot truly live it out without Jesus Christ doing it through us. So this should take a real burden off of us, and it should also inspire and challenge us to the great Hesed that God has called us to. All right, let's look at verses 7 through 12. At an earlier period in Israel, a man removed his sandal and gave it to the other party in order to make any matter legally binding concerning the right of redemption or the exchange of property. This was the method of legally binding a transaction in Israel. So the Redeemer removed his sandal and said to Boaz, "Buy back the property yourself." Boaz said to the elders and all the people, "You are witnesses today that I am buying from Naomi everything that belonged to Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabitess, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, to perpetuate the deceased man's name on his property, so that his name will not disappear among his relatives or from the gate of his hometown. You are witnesses today." All the people who were at the city gate, including the elders, said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is entering your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built the house of Israel. May you be powerful in Ephrathah and your name well known in Bethlehem. May your house become like the house of Perez, the son Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring the Lord will give you by this young woman." Okay, there is so much going on here. First of all, he takes off his sandal, hands it over to Boaz. I hope it wasn't like a really good sandal, because that would be hard, right? You know, just a cheap one would do the trick, right? And that's it. Nameless kinsman redeemer is never heard from again. But then we see that Boaz, in front of all the witnesses, names Naomi, Elimelech, Mahlon, and Kilion. And this is the first time since the story began that the entire family is mentioned. Those three men, it seemed gone. It seemed over for them in the very top of chapter 1. And now all of these people are being mentioned. All of their names will survive because of God's faithfulness. And we see that God is redeeming. God is restoring in a way that we could not imagine. Also, do you remember Ruth 2:12, where Boaz says, "May the Lord bless you. May he reward you for what you have done, and may you find refuge under the wings of the God of Israel." This is a prayer that Boaz has for Ruth. Do you think that Boaz knew that he would be the answer to his own prayer? Isn't that great? And maybe you and I are the answer to the prayers that we are praying for others. So I love this picture here, that Boaz ends up being God's answer for his own prayer, because it will be under his wings that she will take refuge. But I think one of my favorite parts of this whole passage is that he says, "Today I take Ruth, the Moabitess, Mahlon's widow, as my wife." And there are two things that Boaz talks about here that were the two biggest problems for Ruth. One, that she was a non-Israelite. She is a Moabitess. This has been her problem from the beginning. And the second problem is that she is a widow. The tragic loss of her husband. And we see here that Boaz is calling out both of these, possibly just from a legal standpoint. Again, in front of the witnesses, this is who it is. It's Ruth, the Moabitess, Mahlon's widow. But these true things, these things that are true about her, are the things that have been the hardest things for her to overcome. And yet, it doesn't matter because Boaz says in front of everybody, I take her as my wife. She is the one that I choose. In front of everybody. No shame, no problem, nothing stands in the way of his redemption of her. And I cannot help but think of the way that Jesus Christ redeems each of our stories. Everything that could be said about us, and Jesus says, I take you. And he could list all the things, but he's not listing them in a condemning way. It's just that, hey, this is who you are, and I take it all gladly, and not just privately in a back room, but here at the city gate of Bethlehem, where everybody's going to talk, and where everybody is, and where all the elders of the town are, and where all the witnesses are, and I declare it loudly and proudly. This is probably just the pinnacle moment for me in this story, because I think it is such a picture of God's heart for each of us, and what was coming in Jesus Christ. This is an early picture of God's heart for the nations. If not, or if this could happen to Ruth, why not anyone else, right? Number 2, there is nothing in your life God cannot redeem. There is nothing in your life that God cannot redeem. And you may be in the middle of the waiting. You may not see how. You may have, like Naomi, a very clear picture of it can only be done this way. And if it's not going to get redeemed this way, I don't know how it's going to get redeemed. And then God does something totally different. But I remember how excited I was when Lifeway said that I could re-release this study. Because when I first wrote this, probably, 13 years ago or something, you're writing about the Boaz and the Ruth and the unlikely story, and wouldn't it be so great if 13 years later I could get up here and go, okay, guys, I've been waiting to tell you, but I am getting married, or I found my Boaz, and isn't God amazing? And look at how this all worked out all these years later. And it's been amazing how God has done the redemption just like Ruth and Boaz. And I mean, wouldn't that be cool if that could have? It did not happen. It didn't happen that way. But what I love about this is, as I was penning this for the second time, I was like, God has been so faithful. I am still single. I don't have, it's not the Disney story, but it is a great story because there isn't anything in my life that God cannot redeem. And he has done so much in my life, partly because of being able to be single. And he has met me in such unique ways, and I can't tell you how many times, even over the last year, just things in my own work and in my house, and where I'm having to kind of be my own husband. Do you know how that is? I'm sure there are people out there that know how that is. And I have asked the Lord over and over, just, Lord, you're going to have to do this for me. Like, you're going to have to stand up for me in this situation. You're going to have to protect me in this situation. You're going to have to be my financial advisor in this situation. You're going to have to defend me and just go convict that person, because if I had a husband, they would just get in their face, but I don't. So you're going to have to do it. And I just want to say, like, listen, this is not a Walt Disney story. This is a story about God's redemption in people's lives. This is a story that goes forward and marches toward Jesus about what he can do in each of our lives. And it's not just about Ruth and Boaz live happily ever after. In fact, we're going to see, not to give things away, but actually Ruth and Boaz next week we'll find out they kind of disappear. Because this story is really about God, and it's really about what he can do in each of our lives. And it's not about, well, God, if I get my Boaz. God, if I finally have the son. God, if the family name gets to continue. It's just God, and God can do what God is going to do. But I will say, there's absolutely nothing, there's nothing in your life that he cannot redeem. There's just nothing outside of it, and it's so clear here. Okay, so I want to touch base on 11 and 12 too. We already read it, but what's key here is that Ruth has to bear a son. I don't know if you guys have figured that out yet in Israelite culture, but it's not just enough for Ruth and Boaz to get married. For us, in our culture, we're just excited about the wedding, but not for these people, okay? In Bethlehem, all these witnesses, no. They've got to get married, and they've got to have a son, because that's how that family name is going to keep going, and that's how the land's going to keep going, and that's how the legacy is going to happen. So the marriage part is just a piece of it. And so that's why the witness here says all these people at the city gate, and the elders start saying, "May the Lord make the woman who is entering your home like Rachel and Leah, who built up the house of Israel." See, they're like, we're not okay with just the marriage here. We need some serious children that are going to do some awesome things for Israel. And so they reference Rachel and Leah. Now, who are Rachel and Leah? And why is this such a significant mention? Rachel and Leah are the two mothers of Israel. They are the Israelites of Israelites. You do not get any higher, any better than Rachel and Leah, the mothers of the 12 tribes of Israel. So do you see what is happening here? That Ruth the Moabitess now has the support of all of the people in Bethlehem. And they're saying, we want you to be like the greatest of the greatest mothers in all of our history. That's what we want for you. I mean, this is a mind blower. You guys remember all the way back to the introduction, all that the Moabites were guilty of? But this is God. Again, this isn't Boaz's idea. This isn't even the witness's idea. This is God's idea. God's idea to redeem an outsider from a dark land and go, you know what? You are the most unsuspecting person that would ever be viable for something like this. And now all of a sudden, you're the one that I'm going to have everybody say, may you be like Rachel and like Leah. But they don't stop there. Then they talk about, may your house become like the house of Perez, the son Tamar bore to Judah. We will see that Judah is a very significant tribe in Israel. Now, what about Tamar, though? Well, Tamar actually seduces her father-in-law, Judah. She dresses up like a prostitute because he has not been faithful with levirate marriage and she had lost her husband, Judah's son, and he was not being faithful in giving the remaining sons to her. I mean, 2 of them did die. We can kind of understand him. But he withheld from her. And she's like, oh no. So Judah ends up getting her pregnant. And that's Tamar's story. And yet, we see, and we'll find out later, that she plays an extraordinary role in the coming redemption story. So why Tamar? Well, perhaps the Israelites are understanding here that God can take the outsider, God can take the messy situation. God, and both Judah was also quite guilty. In fact, at one point, he even says, you are more righteous, Tamar, than I was. So we have a very messy situation, but yet she becomes a very key figure in Israelite history. Judah, and we'll find out, becomes the most important tribe. And so all the witnesses are saying, well, hey, if God has done this once, maybe, just maybe, he can do this twice by bringing an outsider in. I mean, these blessings are staggering. They are staggering, but what do they tell us? They tell us that Ruth is enjoying full membership in the covenant community of Israel. There is nothing that is off limits to Ruth here. She is enjoying full membership in the covenant community. And this is 3 for us today. Now I'm going to tell you this is a long one. It's not clever. It's just a truth. And I want you to have it. Okay? There are no second-class citizens in the kingdom of God, only daughters of the King with full access to all he is and all he has. And I hope that that is a wake-up word for some of you that are daughters of the King in Christ, and you are living as second-class citizens because of your past, because of your sin, or past sin, or current circumstances, or current situations. And you think, I don't deserve what Jesus has to offer. I don't deserve a place at the table. I don't deserve full membership in the covenant community. And so I'm going to sit back. That is a lie from the enemy. Now, it's a partial truth because we don't deserve it. None of us deserve it. It is a gift. But when we receive it, we're daughters of the King. We have full access to everything he is and everything that he has. And we end up disqualifying ourselves from service in his community. Can you imagine? What if Ruth had have disqualified herself because of who she was? Can you imagine how different life would have been? But she came and she asked for what she knew she could ask for when she asked Boaz to spread the corner of his garment over her. Oh, we see that God cares for the outsiders in such an incredible way. I want to close with verse 13. Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. He slept with her, and the Lord granted conception to her, and she gave birth to a son. Now, I have to tell you, I have a slight beef with the narrator here because he shoves a marriage, a pregnancy, and a birth into one single verse. And I know that there are people that are like, well, maybe he's just not a detailed guy. Oh, no. We know exactly how many bushels of barley, down to the piece of grain, how much she could carry back and forth. We got it. I mean, he gave us a lot of detail about a lot of things. I heard a lot about this sandal being passed over and how the Israelites used to do their things and stuff. And then we just get one verse. That's it. So I have a problem with this. I'm going to let him know when I meet him, Lord willing, in heaven. But no, but I want you to see a few different things here. It says that Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. What's missing? Boaz took Ruth, what? There's no more the Moabitess. Do you see what the narrator did there? Gone. He just took Ruth. He got Ruth as his wife. That descriptor is over. And I love that just that simple absence of the Moabitess. No more Moabitess, just Ruth. They get pregnant, she bears a son. Did you also see the Lord granted conception to her, something that we haven't talked a lot about? She was married before, presumably for those 10 years, to Mahlon, and no children. Is it possible that Ruth was barren? We don't know why, but she clearly, there was an issue, and the Lord opens up her womb. We see that this is the hand of God. This is from Yahweh himself. Well, we could end on verse 13, and it would be an amazing story, and that would be the end, and we would think that it really just couldn't get any better. But I will tell you, I'm so excited for you to do your homework this week because it does actually get better. This story gets even better than it is right now, and we are going to turn our attention mostly back to Naomi. which is kind of how this whole story started. And I can't wait for us to be able to do that. So I will see you back here next week for our final session in the book of Ruth.